this SVT Dharma talk, and I hope your practice was refreshing and enjoyable. Bhante Ramsey always said, practice should be fun, and it's an important aspect to recognize that lightness in the mind, lightness in the body are an important component to the practice, because that helps us see when we move away from that state. Hey, so welcome today, and today we're going to look at a sutta from the Majjhima Nikāya. It's called the Sunakkhatta Sutta, and it's very much about the responsibility that we need to take individually around our practice and how we assess our practice and what we understand is actually going on. So, let's begin. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was living at Vasali, in the great wood, in the hall with the peaked roof. Now, on that occasion, a number of bhikkhus had declared final knowledge in the presence of the Blessed One thus: we understand, earth is destroyed, the holy life has been lived, what has to be done has been done, there is no more coming to any state of being. Sunakkhatta, son of the Lecchavis, heard a number of bhikkhus, it seems, have declared final knowledge in the presence of the Blessed One thus: we understand, birth is destroyed, there is no more coming to any state of being. Then Sunakkhatta, son of the Lecchavis, went to the Blessed One, and after paying homage to him, sat down at one side and said to the Blessed One, I have heard, Venerable Sir, that a number of bhikkhus have declared final knowledge in the presence of the Blessed One. Did they do so rightly? Or are there some bhikkhus here who declare final knowledge because they overestimate themselves? When those bhikkhus, Sunakkhatta, declared final knowledge in my presence, there were some bhikkhus who declared final knowledge rightly, and there were some who declared final knowledge because they overestimate themselves. Therein, when bhikkhus declare final knowledge rightly, their declaration is true. But when bhikkhus declare final knowledge because they overestimate themselves, the Tathagata thinks, I should teach them Dhamma. Thus, it is, in this case, Sunakkhatta, that the Tathagata thinks, I should teach them Dhamma. But some misguided men here formulate a question, come to the Tathagata and ask it. In that case, Sunakkhatta, though the Tathagata has thought, I should teach them Dhamma, he changes his mind. So I think it's part of this that's always kind of come up as a question for me about the meaning of this last statement. But I think what's going on here is that those who overestimate themselves, they ask a question of the Buddha that is probably implying their achievement. And at that time, then perhaps that state of mind is not conducive then to be taught to. And so at that stage, the Tathagata would then change his mind and wait for a more conducive time to teach someone like that. This is the time, Blessed One. This is the time, Sublime One, for the Blessed One to teach the Dhamma. Having heard it from the Blessed One, the bhikkhus will remember it. Then listen, Sunakkhatta, and attend closely to what I have to say. Yes, Venerable Sir, Sunakkhatta, son of Lecchavis, replied to the Blessed One. The Blessed One said this: there are, Sunakkhatta, these 5 cords of sensual pleasure. What are the five? Forms cognizable by the eye that are wished for, desired, agreeable, likable, connected with sensual desire, and provocative of lust. So this is describing relationship to forms seen through the eye, where the fetter or attachment to that experience is present. Similarly, sounds cognizable by the ear, odors cognizable by the nose, flavors cognizable by the tongue, tangibles cognizable by the body, that are wished for, desired, agreeable, and likable, connected with sensual desire, and provocative of lust. These are the five chords of sensual pleasure. So in other places, the Buddha describes that the five senses, there's not a problem with the five senses in themselves, but in this sensual desire and attachment to them. It is possible, Sunakkhatta, that some person here may be intent on worldly material things. When a person is intent on worldly material things, only talk concerning that interests him, and his thinking and pondering are in line with that. And he associates with that kind of person, and he finds satisfaction in that. But when talk about the imperturbable is going on, he will not listen to it, or give it ear, or exert his mind to understand it. He does not associate with that kind of person. He does not find satisfaction in that. So here we have a reference to another sutta where, in the Majjhima Nikāya, where we have this famous phrase about the mind thinking and pondering. And when a person thinks and ponders upon something, that becomes the inclination of their mind. So here, the Tathagata is describing the inclination of the mind being towards worldly material things. And when that's happened, then there's no prospect that they will be interested in the imperturbable. Now, the imperturbable here references the lower arupa jhanas. This is a phrase that's often used to describe these jhanas, the imperturbable. So this is infinite space and infinite consciousness. Suppose, Sunakkhatta, a man has left his own village or town a long time ago, and he were to see another man who had only recently left that village or town. He would ask that man whether the people of that village or town were safe, prosperous, and healthy. And that man would tell him whether the people of that town or village were safe, prosperous, and healthy. What do you think, Sunakkhatta? Would that first man listen to him, give ear to him, exert his mind to understand? Yes, Venerable Sir. So too, Sunakkhatta. It is possible that some person here may be intent on worldly material things. When a person is intent on worldly material things, only talk concerning that interests him, and his thinking and pondering are in line with that. And he associates with that kind of person, and he finds satisfaction in that. But when talk about the imperturbable is going on, he will not listen to it, or give it ear, or exert his mind to understand it. He does not associate with that kind of person, and he does not find satisfaction in that. He should be understood as a person who is intent on worldly material things. It is possible, Sunakkhatta, that some person here may be intent on the imperturbable. So this is the lower of the arupa jhanas. When a person is intent on the imperturbable, only talk concerning that interests him, and his thinking and pondering are in line with that. And he associates with that kind of person, and he finds satisfaction in that. But when talk about worldly material things is going on, he will not listen to it, or give it ear, or exert his mind to understand it. He does not associate with that kind of person. He does not find satisfaction in that. Just as a yellow leaf that has fallen from its stalk is incapable of becoming green again, so too, Sunakkhatta, when a person is intent on the imperturbable, he has shed the fetter of worldly material things. So here's the fetter of the worldly material, the fetter of the five senses. And they're present in one form or another in the early jhanas, but not in the Arupa jhanas. And what's interesting here is the distinction between the fetter and the hindrances. The hindrances are not present in the jhanas because the jhanas are a state without hindrances. But the fetters are a much deeper seated preoccupation of the mind compared to the transitory nature of the hindrances. And so we need to be able to allow, if you like, the mind to move to a place where the fetter associated with the senses is not present. And that is this gradual process of moving through the lower jhanas. The mind becomes more refined and more refined, less engaged and caught up with the grosser forms, if you like, the coarser forms of the fetters of the sensory side. And gradually, as we're moving through the Arupa jhanas, we're moving from the outward to the inward. So we get eventually to the place of the state of nothingness, where the mind is then purely being observing the mind itself. It's not engaging outwardly at all. So we can see that this process through the jhanas is a gradual process of letting things drop away. And as we will see as we go through this sutta, this feature of things dropping away is an important aspect of the practice. So, Sunakkhatta, when a person is intent on the imperturbable, he has shed the fetter of worldly material things. He should be understood as a person detached from the fetter of worldly material things, who is intent on the imperturbable. It is possible, Sunakkhatta, that some person here may be intent on the base of nothingness. Okay, so we've moved through infinite space and infinite consciousness. So we're now leaving behind the imperturbable. When a person is intent on the base of nothingness, only talk concerning that interests him. And his thinking and pondering are in line with that. And he associates with that kind of person. And he finds satisfaction in that. But when talk about the imperturbable is going on, he will not listen to it or give ear to it. So what we've got here is an interesting area where the mind is not engaging with previous states. And I remember a conversation with Sister Kima, several years ago, where we were talking about how the monastic structure was organized at the time of the Buddha for training. And I was very interested in the comments she made at that time, because Sister Kima said, well, how they organized it was that they broke it down into 8 units. And those 8 units were the people who had no experience before, so just beginning. Those who'd had fruition, the past knowledge of Sotapanna, and they studied together. And those who had the fruit knowledge of Sotapanna, they studied together. And so all the way through, path and fruit as separate groups who would then be practicing together. And I often wondered where there was evidence of that. And when I came across this sutta, it struck me that here we have a description of how progress moves through these various states of awareness. here being described as the jhanas. And it seems to me that this seems quite similar, that only information and discussion around the state that was actually being experienced at the time was of interest. And so it seems to me that this is perhaps a suggestion that maybe this is the way things were structured, that people in various states would practice together. And so that any discussion that was going on with the guides and the teachers at that time would simply be in the area that they were interested in and growing in at that time. So here we have a state that we're going deeper and deeper. And as we move into nothingness, the mind is not looking outside itself. It's turning inward. And so here we've moved away from the 6 sense doors completely. Now, you'll be aware of this in your own practice, because sometimes the 6 sense doors become clearer again. And that may be when contact occurs. So if there's contact, then you'll have a tactile sense, or if there's a sound comes, the mind catches on to, then that will be awareness, but then the mind wants to go back to be aware of itself again. He does not associate with that kind of person. He does not find satisfaction in that. Just as a thick stone that is split in two cannot be joined together again, so too, Sunakkhatta, when a person is intent on the base of nothingness, his fetter of the imperturbable has been split. He should be understood as a person detached from the fetter of the imperturbable. So now we're extending the concept of fetter to anything that draws us back to a previous state in this progression that we're going through. So something which we have previously aspired to, which might be the imperturbable, is now considered a fetter as we move into the state of nothingness. So he should be understood as a person detached from the fetter of the imperturbable and who is intent on the base of nothingness. It is possible, Sunakkhatta, that some person here may be intent on the base of neither perception nor non-perception. When a person is intent on the base of neither perception or non-perception, only talk concerning that interests him, and his thinking and pondering are in line with that. And he associates with that kind of person, and he finds satisfaction in that. But when talk about the base of nothingness is going on, he will not listen to it, nor give ear, or exert his mind to understand it. He does not associate with that kind of person. He does not find satisfaction in that. So, moving into the state of neither perception or non-perception is a progression where we're increasingly moving away from, if you like, a clarity of experience, of objectified experience. Infinite space has a definite sensation to it, expansiveness. We feel the energy expanding outward in all directions. Infinite consciousness, and it changes subtly, and we feel there's a change in the experience, but we're aware of that experience. But once we're getting up into nothingness and then into neither perception or non-perception, we're really getting away from that clarity of experience. And I remember that Bhante Varanasi would often say that you could almost feel that you weren't sure whether you were experiencing or not experiencing things. And it feels like the previous clarity has, if you like, to a degree has evaporated. And that's because the state has become much more subtle. And when we're in that state, it's really simply, and if you like, staying or willing to stay with a feeling of knowing and observing. And when we come out from that state, sometimes we can wonder whether we've been asleep or whether we've just not been paying attention, or you know, whether we've just been nodding off. And something that Bhante Mahamsa used to say was, well, if you can remember being in the state, then you were there. But if you just can't remember anything, then the chances are that perhaps the mind had begun to drift. Maybe slop and torpor had come in and such like. And he would encourage you to maybe pick up your energy a little bit more in your investigation through the walking meditation. Because the state of neither perception nor non-perception is a state where we need to balance, and we need to balance the faculties of awakening in a really quite subtle way. And if we're not careful, we put a little bit too much effort in, and there's restlessness in the practice. We put a little too little effort in, and we get this dharmas coming through. And so he would describe this as a balancing act to go through this. And what I think is helpful here is to recognize that if we just set the intention at this stage for more energy, or the intention for more tranquility, or we can ask our intuition, what is it I need to do to have more mindfulness at this stage? Then the way that the mind has calmed down and become, if you like, more accessible, often we'll get an intuitive answer to what we need to do. And one of the challenges here is to try to control, and we need to move away from control here. Our role is just to observe, just to see what is going on. So he does not associate with the kind of person who is interested in nothingness. He doesn't find any satisfaction. As a consequence of that, his thinking and pondering are in line with neither perception nor non-perception. And he associates with that kind of person, and he finds satisfaction in that. But when talk about the base of nothingness is going on, he will not listen to it or give ear to it or exert his mind to understand it. He does not associate with that kind of person. He does not find satisfaction in that. Suppose a person has eaten some delicious food and thrown it up. What do you think, Sunakkhatta? Would that man have any desire to eat that food again? No, Venerable Sir. Why is that? Because that food is considered repulsive. So what's being described here? Well, when we've gone through one of the states of jhana and moved on to another, the mind is not interested in exploring aspects of what we've left behind. We're expanding into where the mind is moving. And so if we find ourselves attached to previous experiences, so for instance, Bhante Viramsci would often say that sometimes people would come in and they would be almost distressed that the feeling of loving kindness had moved into something different. And they were attached to the feeling of loving kindness. And they would feel upset that that had begun to disappear and something else replace it. And they might say, I've lost the happiness. Well, this is what this paragraph is alluding to, that holding on to that happiness, even though it was a delicious food at the time, is like having vomited the food, going back to try and eat it. The implication here is that that's absolutely not what we want to do in the practice. We want to move on to different states as we move through. Don't hold on to things, however delicious or delightful they are as its experiences. So to Sunakkhatta, when a person is intent on the base of neither perception nor non-perception, his fetter of the base of nothingness has been rejected. He should be understood as a person detached from the fetter of the base of nothingness, who is intent on the base of neither perception nor non-perception. So having said this, the progression through the jhanas is a natural consequence. It's a natural evolution. We don't have to make the intention to leave something behind and to expand to something else. The mind evolves, and this natural evolution is actually an important lesson for us because it's a lesson in anatta. It's a lesson in the fact that we don't control that process. As this jhana evolves, it naturally moves into the next jhana. As we develop the loving kindness, it naturally moves into compassion, which then naturally moves into sympathetic joy, which then naturally moves into equanimity. We don't have to choose or control the process. It evolves on its own. So this is an aspect of anatta, not non-self, because if it were an aspect of a true self, then we would be in control of this process. It is possible, Sunakkhatta, that some person here may be completely intent on Nibbana. When a person is completely intent on Nibbana, only talk concerning that interests him, and his thinking and pondering are in line with that, and he associates with that kind of person, and he finds satisfaction in that. But when talk about the base of neither perception nor non-perception is going on, he will not listen to it, nor give ear, nor exert his mind to understand it. He does not associate with that kind of person and does not find satisfaction in that. Okay, so when the mind is intent on Nibbana, we can think of this as the mind moving into cessation. The mind has left neither perception nor non-perception behind and is inclined towards cessation. And so this is, if you like, through the process of cessation, there is the glimpsing of the state of Nibbana. So just as a palm tree with its top cut off is incapable of growing again, so too Sunakkhatta, when a person is completely intent on Nibbana, his fetter of the base of neither perception nor non-perception has been cut off at the root, made like a palm stump, done away with so that it is no longer subject to future arising. He should be understood as a person detached from the fetter of neither perception nor non-perception, who is completely intent on Nibbana. It is possible, Sunakkhatta, that some bhikkhu here might think thus, craving has been called an arrow by the recluse. The poisonous humor of ignorance is spread about by desire, lust, and ill will. That arrow of craving has been removed from me. The poisonous humor of ignorance has been expelled. So here, the expulsion of desire, lust, and ill will. We're talking about the deep-seated reflexes that have been removed. So the assessment here is that the work has been done. So the arrow of craving has been removed from me, the poisonous humor of ignorance has been expelled. I am one who is completely intent on Nibbana. Since he conceives himself thus, though it is contrary to fact, he might pursue those things that are unsuitable for one completely intent on Nibbana. So this is, an overestimation for whatever reason. This person conceives himself to have expelled this desire, lust, and ill will, but it is contrary to the fact. And so if this person, this practitioner, really believes this of themselves, then they may feel that whatever comes up in the mind cannot be subject to desire, lust, and ill will, and is therefore okay to pursue. So what's the Buddha saying here is, he says, and he might pursue those things that are unsuitable for one completely intent on Nibbana. So what Majjhima Ramsay may say here is that the experience of Nibbana has been there, but with the absence of fruit, the fruition knowledge, there isn't the actual personality change coming through. So as a consequence of that, this practitioner might pursue the sight of unsuitable forms with the eye, might pursue unsuitable sounds with the ear, unsuitable odors with the nose, unsuitable flavors with the tongue, unsuitable tangibles with the body, or unsuitable mind objects with the mind. When he pursues the sight of unsuitable forms with the eye, unsuitable objects with the mind, lust invades his mind. When with his mind invaded with lust, he would incur death or deadly suffering. So what have we got going on here? We've got the fetters rising again, this relationship to sensory experience. Suppose a man were wounded by an arrow, thickly smeared with poison, and his friends and companions, his kinsmen and relatives, brought a surgeon. The surgeon would cut open around the opening of the wound with a knife. Then he would probe for the arrow with a probe. Then he would pull out the arrow and would expel the poisonous humor, leaving a trace of it behind. So, what is the trace that's left behind? Oh, this is the incomplete eradication of greed, hatred, and delusion. These, if you like, kilesas are not fully extracted. So even though there's a very high attainment in the practice, the work is not yet complete. Thinking that no trace was left behind, you would say, good man, the arrow has been pulled out from you, the poisonous humor has been expelled with no trace left behind, and it is incapable of harming you. Eat only suitable food, do not eat unsuitable food, or else the wound may suppurate. From time to time, wash the wound, and from time to time, anoint its opening, so that pus and blood do not cover the opening of the wound. Do not walk around in the wind and sun, or else dirt and dust may infect the wound, the opening of the wound. Take care of your wound, good man, and see to it that the wound heals. So even though the surgeon has done the work to the extent that they have, the patient still needs to take care, to be aware, to be constantly mindful of encouraging, if you like, the healing process to continue. The man would think, the arrow has been pulled out from me, the poisonous humor has been expelled with no trace left behind, and it is incapable of harming me. He would eat unsuitable food, and the wound would suppurate. He would not wash the wound from time to time, nor would he anoint its opening from time to time. And pus and blood would cover the opening of the wound. He would walk around in wind and sun, and dust and dirt would infect the wound, the opening of the wound. He would not take care of his wound, nor would he see it that the wound heals. Then both because he does what is unsuitable, and because a trace was left behind when the foul, poisonous humor was expelled, the wound would swell. With its swelling, he would incur death or deadly suffering. So, how are we to understand this? Because, if you like, the surgeon has done the best that he was able and thought the job was done. Well, perhaps this is the realization of path. And then we need to keep tending and looking carefully at all that's going on to ensure that healing is complete. And this is the continuing of the practice after the path experience, so that there's experience of fruition. So to Sunakkhatta, it is possible that some bhikkhu here might think thus: craving has been called an arrow by the recluse. The poisonous humor of ignorance is spread about by desire, lust, and ill will. That arrow of craving has been removed from me. The poisonous humor of ignorance has been expelled. I am one who is completely intent on Nibbana. Because he conceives himself thus, though it is contrary to fact, he might pursue those things that are unsuitable for one completely intent on Nibbana. He might pursue the sight of unsuitable forms with the eye. He might pursue unsuitable sounds with the ear, unsuitable odors with the nose, unsuitable flavors with the tongue, unsuitable tangibles with the body, or unsuitable mind objects with the mind. When he pursues the sight of unsuitable forms with the eye, unsuitable objects with the mind, lust invades his mind. With his mind invaded by lust, he would incur death or deadly suffering. For it is death in the discipline of the noble one, Sunakkhatta, when one abandons the training and reverts to the low life. And it is deadly suffering when one commits defiled offense. It is possible, Sunakkhatta, that some bhikkhu here might think thus: craving has been called an arrow by the recluse. The poisonous humor of ignorance is spread about by desire, lust, and ill will. That arrow of craving has been removed from me. The poisonous humor of ignorance has been expelled. I am one who is completely intent on Nibbana. Being one who really is completely intent on Nibbana, he would not pursue those things that are unsuitable for one intent on Nibbana. He would not pursue the sight of unsuitable forms with the eye. He would not pursue unsuitable sounds with the ear, unsuitable odors with the nose, unsuitable flavors with the tongue, unsuitable tangibles with the body, or unsuitable mind objects with the mind. Because he does not pursue the sight of unsuitable forms with the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, or unsuitable mind objects with the mind, lust does not invade his mind. Because his mind is not invaded by lust, he would not incur death or deadly suffering. So, suppose Sunakkhatta, a man were wounded by an arrow, thickly smeared with poison, and his friends and companions, his kinsmen and relatives brought a surgeon. The surgeon would cut around the opening of the wound with a knife. Then he would probe for the arrow with a probe, and he would pull out the arrow, and he would expel the poisonous humor without leaving a trace of it behind. Knowing that no trace was left behind, he would say, "Good man, the arrow has been pulled out from you. The poisonous humor has been expelled with no trace left behind, and it is incapable of harming you. Eat only suitable food. Do not eat unsuitable food, or else the wound may suppurate. From time to time, wash the wound, and from time to time, anoint its opening, so that pus and blood do not cover the opening of the wound. Do not walk around in the wind and sun, or else dust and dirt may infect the wound. Take care of your wound, good man, and see to it that the wound heals." The man would think, "The arrow has been pulled out from me. The poisonous humor has been expelled, with no trace left behind, and is incapable of harming me. He would only eat suitable food, and the wound would not suppurate. From time to time, he would wash the wound. From time to time, he would anoint its opening. Pus and blood would not cover the opening of the wound. He would not walk around in wind and sun, and dust and dirt would not infect the opening of the wound. He would take care of his wound and would see to it that the wound heals. Then, both because he does what is suitable and because no trace was left behind, when the foul, poisonous humor had been expelled, excuse me, the wound would heal, and because it had healed and was covered with skin, he would not incur death or deadly suffering." So we have two things here. We have the full extraction of the poison, greed, hatred, and delusion, and we have suitable behavior. Those are the two things that go together. So there is still a guarding of the experience, even after fruition, path and fruition, and still there is an awareness of, if you like, personal responsibility to maintain a suitable environment for this healing to take place, or we might say, perhaps think of this as continuing growth to take place. So to Sunakkhatta, it is possible that some bhikkhus here might think thus: craving has been called an arrow by the recluse. The poisonous humor of ignorance is spread about by desire, lust, and ill will. The arrow of craving has been pulled out from me. The poisonous humor of ignorance has been expelled. I am one who is completely intent on Nibbana. Being one who is really is completely intent on Nibbana, he would not pursue those things unsuitable for one completely intent on Nibbana. Because his mind is not invaded by lust and all the other senses as well, he would not incur death or deadly suffering. Sunakkhatta, I have given this simile in order to convey a meaning. This is the meaning here. Wound is a term for the 6 internal faces. Poisonous humor is a term for ignorance, greed or hatred and ignorance. Arrow is a term for craving. Probe is a term for mindfulness. Knife is a term for noble wisdom. Surgeon is a term for the Tathagata, the accomplished one, the fully enlightened one. That bhikkhu, Sunakkhatta, is one who practices restraint in the 6 phases of contact. Having understood that acquisition is the root of suffering, being acquisitionless liberated in the destruction of the acquisitions, it is not possible that he would direct his body or arouse his mind towards any acquisition. I'm going to come back to the word acquisition in a moment as we go through the sutta. Suppose, Sunakkhatta, there were a bronze cup of beverage possessing a good color, smell, and taste, but it was mixed with poison. And a man came who wanted to live, not to die, who wanted pleasure and recovered from pain. What do you think, Sunakkhatta? Would that man drink that cup of beverage, knowing if I drink this, I will incur death or deadly suffering? No, Venerable Sir. So here the Buddha's describing the awareness that comes with the progressive understanding through practice. So however seductive the beverage looks, the understanding is that by attachment to that, takes us out of the practice. Remember the death and deadly suffering was about, if you like, leaving the practice and returning to the perspectives of a layperson who doesn't understand, from their perspective, the cause of suffering. So this attachment to the senses, this fetter of the senses, would take us back to that perspective of only wanting to hear about the senses, rather than maintaining the understanding that the practice has created. So here, what the Buddha is describing is that with the experience of the practice, this awareness is very clear. And so we wouldn't choose to drink a beverage that had so much suffering as a consequence of it. So too, that bhikkhu is one who practices restraint in the 6 bases of contact, having understood that acquisition is the root of suffering, being acquisitionless, liberated in the destruction of the acquisitions, it is not possible that he would direct his body or arouse his mind towards acquisition. So this is the, if you like, is the accumulating of experience, the holding on to experience. And what he's directing his body and his mind towards is, if you like, the destruction or the leaving behind of the process of acquiring, this acquisition. Suppose, Sunakkhatta, there were a deadly poisonous snake, and a man came who wanted to live, not to die, who wanted pleasure and recovered from pain. What do you think, Sunakkhatta? Would that man give that deadly poisonous snake his hand or his thumb, knowing if I am bitten by him, I will incur death or deadly suffering? No, Venerable Sir. So too, when a bhikkhu practices restraint in the 6 bases of contact, and having understood that attachment is the root of suffering, is without attachment, liberated by the destruction of attachment. It is not possible that he would direct his body or arouse his mind towards any object of attachment. So, acquisition is about this attachment. When we go through inclining our mind towards acquisition, we are developing this sense of attachment. That is what the Blessed One said, Sunakkhatta, son of the Licchavis, was satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words. So, the essence here is the importance, if you like, of fruition in the practice. The path reveals the understanding that we need to acquire, but it's the fruition that embeds that understanding into, if you like, a change in behavior. Okay, so thank you for listening to that. Any questions?
Hello, Hugh.
Hello, Evan.
Thank you for this talk. I have a question. It's actually the one thing that's I think is not in here, but it may be beside the point of this particular sutta. Anyway, it doesn't talk about how the perspective from the worldly desires goes to the I think it was imperturbable, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So here the jump is from the attachment to the material to the imperturbable. And one of the things that we can think of here is that if we think of the first four jhanas as, if you like, a gradual releasing away from the material realm. So by the time we get to the fourth jhana, sensation of the body, for instance, has disappeared. We've moved from the material to the mental. And so we're going through a progressive process of sense withdrawal. And as we withdraw from those senses, they're not available for attachment because we're not experiencing through them. But we still remain with the mental. So that's why they're the 5 modes of sensual pleasure rather than the 6, because the mind is still present. Is that okay?
Yeah, thank you. That's I was wondering. You said 5, but no, it had a good reason. I didn't get it. Thank you.
Okay, no,
Yeah.
Thank you for the question. Any other questions? I think what's interesting around the sutta is that there's certain teaching in there that we're familiar with. As with so much of the subtlety of the Buddha's teaching, he takes a particular perspective because of the audience he's dealing with. And he's clearly had some of his monks come to him with a process of self-declaration. And this has not always been an appropriate one. And what he's inviting by the similes that and the stories that he's giving here is that you really need to look at your own individual behavior to see if your estimation of your understanding and the changes that have occurred are actually consolidated or not. And this is a very important thing. This is, this process of reviewing our practice and reviewing it is what we should continually do. Because sometimes the states that we come into as a nature or as a consequence of the practice can be quite long-lived. They might be around for a number of days, weeks, or even months. And then we might find something happens. And then we have to reassess where we thought we were. And, overestimation is not an offense in the Vinaya. What is an offense in the Vinaya is claiming a state when you know you're not there. Overestimation, it can be an honest error. And so we should always be prepared to re-estimate, if you like, where we are. And of course, if we find ourselves not quite where we thought we were, then we need to go through that process of kindness to ourselves and forgiveness. And then come back and re-establish the practice. And then welcome the fact perhaps that there's still more to be understood, which is an important thing to always bear in mind. So no one can actually tell you where you are. Only you can tell yourself where you aren't. And this is a bit like the nature of science. In common parlance, in lay life, with non-scientists, there's often a belief that science proves things. Oh, for those involved in science, they will recognize that science cannot prove something. It can only postulate an idea, a theory, perspective. What science is very good at is disproving things. So if there's a hypothesis, then it will be tested. And if the test results are consistent with the hypothesis, then the hypothesis stands until it's tested again and tested again. But if it's tested and the results are against the hypothesis, then the hypothesis falls. And it's no different in our meditation. If we feel that we've attained to a certain understanding and a certain mode of behavior, then we test it. But we continue to test it. We continue to be curious. We continue to follow the precepts. We continue to have suitable behavior so that we do not make this false assumption that because we're at such an elevated state, whatever that is, that our behavior cannot be of a particular characteristic, so we can do anything because we can't possibly be approaching it from the wrong perspective. No, the Buddha's careful instruction here is that we should still retain that consistency of behavior, not to get caught up in the fetters around sensory experience. And so the responsibility is on us. The Buddha can only guide us towards that and encourage us to remain inquiring. Anything else anyone would like to add at this time? No? Okay, so maybe we should close with sharing merit. So just share this screen. Okay. So may suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find relief. May all beings share this merit that we have thus acquired with the acquisition of all kinds of happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty power, share this merit of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you very much for joining in today.
Thank you.